This is my 14th Davos.
I love the SDG Tent.
We have 10 years to reach the goals we've set.
Because the future of humanity depends upon the wisdom and the cooperation which you are about to create.
The will to change when it's necessary is a renewable resource.
A warm welcome to all of you as we open today the online version of the SDG Tent with a conversation entitled No SDG Left Behind, Driving Bold Business Action for a Fair and Sustainable World. This session is hosted by the partners of the SDG Tent, namely the INSEAD Hoffmann Institute, Tent, Procter & Gamble, Royal DSM, Salesforce, and Yara International. As you and some of you know, over the past 2 years, we have gathered in person in a physical SDG tent in Davos during the World Economic Forum. Well, this year, as everything else, it is a little bit different. We've been grounded, and so we're meeting here from all around the world online. My name is Katell Goulven. I'm the Executive Director at INSEAD of the Hoffmann Global Institute for Business and Society. This is an institute which has a mission to integrate sustainability within business education with the objective to form leaders who will then place sustainability and thus the SDGs at the core of their organization. That's our commitment, that's our contribution to this debate. We'll hear today about the other partners of the tent, how they are contributing to the SDGs and accelerating progress, because this is what we need. In the coming months, in the same location, this virtual SDG tent, we will have a series of conversations on really looking at the role of business in providing the SDGs. And to kick off this series, we've tried to gather all the partners so that they speak to us about their intentions. Before we start, just a few housekeeping rules. We'll have some time for a Q&A at the end of the session after all the speakers have shared their insights and their concrete actions. So I'm not seeing it myself from where I am, but I understand you have a little button on the upper right corner of your screen that is red with a question mark on it. You can click here and ask your questions. We will then aggregate them and then ask them to our panelists. Thanks for this. So just to kick off, we are just a few weeks into 2021. I don't know how you all feel. We can see some hope on the horizon with the vaccine, also with some changes in leadership. I won't name names, but I would just mention that there is one happening today. But even with this hope on the horizon, the context remains rather bleak. The pandemic is still with us. Its economic impact, it's still affecting the most vulnerable disproportionately. We've seen with the launch of the WEF Global Risk Report yesterday that environmental risk also stay for the 4th year in a row at the top of the global risk at the horizon of 10 years. And finally, we've also heard from the Elderman Trust Barometers that we are really in a major trust crisis. But that barometer also shows that business is the most trusted institution within this critical context, and that people do expect business leaders to take action on global issues. So we have some of these leaders here with us today to see how business and the business community in general can help turn things around, trying to answer to this trust that is placed in them. We'll be joined by Geraldine Matchett, who is the co-CEO of Royal DSM, by André Hoffmann, the chairman of INSEAD and the vice chairman of Roche, by Svein Holsether, president and CEO of Yara International, and Damon Jones, who's the chief operations officer with Procter & Gamble. He will join us by video. Unfortunately, David Beasley, who was supposed to open our event, has just been unable to participate, and we had just had a last-minute cancellation. He was eager to come and contribute to bring a sense of urgency, because the reason why he's not here is because he's on his way to the Middle East due to changing US policies with regard to the region. And you will, maybe like me, have heard him at the end of last year saying something that stayed with me, that 2021 will be probably, there is some risk that it will be the worst humanitarian year since the creation of the UN. So as I was mentioning, he's not here. I'm not speaking for him, obviously, but he brings a sense of urgency to the conversation that we have today. With this, let's me turn to André Hoffmann. André, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You are the chairman of INSEAD and the vice chairman of Roche. You are a businessman as well as an environmental champion, championing nature conservation and sustainability. And actually, we'll talk about that, being a business person and also an environmentalist. Today, you also sit in the governing board and board of trustees of the World Economic Forum and of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Yesterday, during the press conference of Klaus Schwab to talk about the Davos agenda, it's kicking off next week, he mentioned that 2021 will be a decisive year to recreate trust. So I was wondering to what extent you also thought that 2021 was a pivotal year to rethink our economic model and how we create value collectively, and also to hear what INSEAD is doing about that.
Well, thank you very much, Katell, for this introduction. Yes, indeed, trust is an issue. Trust is an issue that we have to take we have to take it front on. This is something quite important for the future of our relationship together as society. What the Edelman Trust Barometer measures is not only the trust vis-à-vis businesses, but also the trust vis-à-vis institutions and the trust vis-à-vis politicians. And we can see that there's a marked decline in trust towards governments, towards institutions in the broader sense. Businesses tend to react a little bit more positively, but still we are at less than 50% trust, and I think that's a very worrying thing going forward. I think in that context, it's important to understand that the current crisis, the pandemic, is just an acceleration of something that was present before that. There are some pressure points into the way we've constructed society. There are some pressure points into the way we've developed our modus operandi as humanity. And these pressure points are getting more obvious through the pandemic than they were before. I feel that this notion that the pandemic is the crisis is probably overrated. What's the crisis is the way we deal with the pandemic and the origin of that pandemic. In particular, our relationship with nature, and we will come back to that later. Mm-hmm. So if we assume that pandemic is just an accelerator, we need to make sure that we use that particular pandemic as wisely as possible. There have been 20 million deaths recorded to date. This is a humongous cost to humanity, and it's a source of a lot of grief. I think that in order to make sure that we do not lose this opportunity, we need to come back into a more sustainable working system. We need to create a world architecture that will be more robust and in particular more resilient to exogenous threats. The fact that a virus has succeeded in destroying part of our modus operandi, I find extremely worrying, because it tells me that the way we are organized is not fit for purpose. And that, I think, is a general conclusion we can reach quite easily. So what can we do? there are a couple of possible solutions, and I think that it's very important that we understand the roles and responsibility of different participants. Governments have a role to play, regulators, parliaments have a role to play, but we also need to have some strength, enthusiasm, and competence to rebuild what has been lost in the last year. I do not think that NGOs, civil society in the broader sense, or government will be able to be the solution on their own. They will need the support of the entrepreneurial capacity, the entrepreneurial strength of business. And hence this idea of developing Intent, which is a place where businesses can exchange onto these broader societal issues. We've chosen as a model, as you can see on the left of your screen, the SDG, which are a set of data, which are a set of targets, which can a set of goals, which will help us to do the best out of humanity and do the best out of the natural resources we have available. It's very important that we continue to create a growth, because we are going to need more than ever the means to help humanity. Katell introduced that mentioned that into her introduction. We have people who are going to need help in the future, and for that we need to create value. But we cannot create value as we used to do it before, because that has a cost that is too high to bear. And when I say a cost, I don't mean just financial cost. I mean an impact on environment, on social, and on human systems in a way which is out of proportion with the benefit we take out of it. So I know we are going to discuss this on this panel, but I think one of the main problems we have is that we do not measure impact in a way which is sufficiently transparent to help us to make the right decisions. Today, when we measure performance, we think mostly about finance, when in fact we know that this financial result is realized at the cost of a number of other factors, in particular social and environmental. And undoubtedly we'll be coming back to that. But to come back to the solutions that we will address, of course, there has to be a partnership between private interests, between private entrepreneurship and regulators. And I think that there is an opportunity to accelerate the change we need to see, because a lot of businesses have had some difficulties over the last year, or are still having difficulties, and they need to receive some support. Now, the support is given mostly by governments, and these governments are lending money or making money available in whatever shape or form to businesses so that they can continue to create the livelihoods or to support the livelihoods that we need. And these lending processes, these refinancing processes have to include some green conditionality. I think it's very important that governments do not reignite the previous system, but that they amend it by introducing a little bit more conditionality, green conditionality, into the way they develop. And again, the reason for Intent is to serve as a platform for an exchange where this sort of thing can take place. So in the past, we've been using the opportunity of the Davos Forum, where a lot of people come and go from different parts of society. And I mean for that, the civil society, academia, religion, businesses, government. And we would like to continue to keep this momentum flying for the tent, the virtual tent that we have now just created. So just to differentiate, Intent is a private initiative. SDG Tent is a collaboration of all the partners you've mentioned in your introduction. But I'm very glad to say that we have been able to find a working relationship.
Thank you very much, André. And indeed, this notion of partnership is something that we're going to hear more. And the role also of this tent in bringing partners together to push a particular agenda is important. We'll come back also on this importance of measuring what matters, as you rightly say, because now we need to take into account values that also relate to people, to well-being of people, as well as to the well-being of nature. In the introduction, you are really sitting at the interface between business and the environmental movement and environmental solutions. And you've been a very strong advocate of what's called nature-based solution. So can you tell me a little bit more about what they are, giving me a concrete example, and why you think today that this is one of the solutions business should increasingly adopt to accelerate progress towards the SDGs?
So I think if we want to really bring this idea forward in as clear a way as possible, we have to really understand that the way humanity deals with the environment has greatly changed since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The idea that we create a collective way of creating value that will help society is an old idea. It's a couple of 100 years old. It's been around for a while. The Industrial Revolution has created an opportunity to concentrate more and more of the activities onto very simple and very specialized fields. So we have been creating value at the cost of other types of capital. So we are using nature in order to create value, and that value, that money, gets then reinvested into society. The consequence of this is that we have been focusing more and more into one single dimension, which is the short-term profit maximization. That particular approach has created the problems we see now. I mean, the consequences of an uncontrolled and an unreasoned use of natural resources has been made possible just because all that matters is the result, and the result is more cash being generated. I would like to contend that what we really want to do if you want to create stability is a more complex system, a system where you look at not only the use of money, but also the use of a number of different capitals, the social, the human, and the natural capital. And so if we want to make sure that we construct a future that looks, that looks into the future, a future that is sustainable, we will need to use resources in a renewable way. And the best way to do that is not just to dominate nature, to use nature for our purpose, but to work alongside it in the collaboration you just mentioned. Collaboration as a rule is a much more solid system than domination. And so the idea of using natural resources in a way which is in balance with the way they regenerate themselves, so being able to use every year the income rather than the capital, to take a financial analogy, should allow us to create a much more robust system which can support the sort of shock we've been seeing for the pandemic. I'll give you a practical example. I chair a foundation based in the Camargue, in the south of France, where we've been for the past 60 years studying the functioning of wetlands, so of places where water is being retained. So that goes from the temporary marsh all the way to the lagoon, full lakes, etc. Wetlands. In the Mediterranean, wetlands play a very important role into the whole water cycle. And as we know, water and water scarcity is an issue for the region, for the south, and for the Mediterranean in the near future. So wetlands can do all sorts of things. They can purify water, they can store water, they can deal with the shocks of different floodings by absorbing some of the excess. They can also provide some recreational space for the people who live locally, and they maintain biodiversity by attracting a lot of not only plants, but also birds and other types of wild animals. So all these benefits to humanity have for the moment been neglected because our traditional specializing short-term profit maximization approach would be to say a wetland has to be drained in order to be used productively. Now, productively is a concept which is complex, and I don't want to go into this, but I would like to contend that you get more benefits to humanity if you just do not use the wetlands for immediate consumption, but if you use them for the long-term architecture of what you're trying to do. So there again, collaboration with nature, using the wetlands to purify the water rather than constructing a treatment plant which is expensive, wholly artificial, needs maintenance, and is very often less efficient than the natural equivalent. All these things taken together sort of convince me that if we want to solve some of the issues that humanity is facing, going back to a certain amount of bioengineering, which is something that we've been living with for the past 2,000 years, years should be beneficial rather than detrimental. So I think that it's very important in the long term to develop that and to help to make it more productive. I'll give you just an example on the principle of what we were discussing before. European governments, in particular the UK and the French government, have now announced that 30% of the international aid will be focused around what we call nature-based solution, NBS. And they've announced that at the One Planet Summit in Paris on the 11th of January. So this is new, fresh thinking, which is being turned into active policy by governments. Just what we want, private-public partnership using nature-based solution for the benefit of humanity.
Thank you, André. And I think what I'm hearing also when I'm listening to you is that requires a complete change of mindset in terms of how all actors, business and others, are looking at nature, are valuing previous environmental services that were just taken for granted, basically, and that we also need to account for. And that's also something that we'll come back to later when we talk about what do we account for, and in a classic P&L of a company. So thank you for that. And just quickly, are you hopeful that business leaders and managers today are aware of this potential and of the need to move into nature-based solutions and are receptive to this change of mindset that is needed?
Well, I'd like to quote one of the board member of the institute at INSEAD, Pavan Sukhdev, who says, "We use nature because it's free, and yet it is priceless." You know, the fact that clean air and fresh water is taken as granted and for free is something which does not correspond to reality. It actually has a cost to maintain that clean air and that fresh air, or rather, it has a cost to make sure that it doesn't get dirty, which is what you were saying there. Yes, I do have hope in the future. I can see more and more of the businesses realizing that sustainability and caring about the way we do business is not just something that you do because you have the luxury of doing it. It's something that you do because we need to do it. Nature and social systems are our life support system on Earth. If we do tamper with it, we will have to suffer the consequences. And who would be interested in running a business of which you know that it has an end? You want to run a business which is going to be forever. So you need to take today the moves that are going to guarantee the possibility to continue to operate in the future. And we are talking about very short times. If we don't change, I mean, just another statistic, WWF, the World Wide Fund for Nature, published the Living Planet report 3 months ago. We have lost 60%, 57% actually, of vertebrate species in the last 40 years. We are consuming nature at the rhythm that is absolutely unsustainable. And so we need to do something about that, and businesses know that.
Thank you, André. And just to recall that the reason why we are online today and we've been grounded is also because of our tampering with nature and of the increased zoonose that then transfer from nature and from animals to us humans here. So thank you, André. I'd like to welcome now our second speaker, Svein Holsether. Hopefully I'm still pronouncing your name properly. Sorry if I don't, Svein. You are the CEO of Yara International. You also, and that's why you're here with us in that tent today, a passionate advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals in your own company, as well as in broader coalitions of corporate actors. You are, for instance, a member of the executive committee and chair of the Nature and Food Program with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. One of these coalitions, together like this tent, like World Economic Forum, trying to bring actors to push for change. Now, Svein, as I mentioned in my introduction, we have a sense of urgency with us here. And I know you share that concern about that. We are 9 years away from the Sustainable Development Goals deadline. So can you tell me how you think business can accelerate progress now? And in particular, because this is something your company is putting a lot of emphasis on, how can technology help us? And same thing, I will ask you to give me some concrete example. Over to you, Tori.
Thanks, Katell, and also thanks, André. Really interesting to to listen to you as always. Well, there's been a lot of talk for many years and much less action, unfortunately. And basically, we've known about the climate crisis or the emerging crisis for more than 4 decades. If we read the Charney report from 1979, it actually describes with great detail what we are experiencing right now if the emissions were going according to the projected modeling that they had at that time. So we've known about it for decades, yet we have done very little. Last year we said we have a decade to fix it, and as you just pointed out, now we have 9 years to do this. It is doable, but we don't have a lot of time, and there's not much margin for error. Regarding technology, it's all about knowledge. It's about distribution of knowledge. However, we have to make that available to everyone. Otherwise, we risk creating an even bigger divide than what we have today. And when we manage to make knowledge accessible to all, not just a few, we have, per definition, created a more fair and inclusive world. And if David Beasley was here, we could have talked about or had a discussion about what we're doing together to support smallholder farmers in Africa. But let me give a very concrete example linked to that. This summer, last summer, we launched an initiative together, Yara World Food Program and the Norwegian government, to provide input to African smallholder farmers, and also at the same time create a digital platform to help with agronomic knowledge. That's now supporting 250,000 farmers, and it's providing food for 1 million people for 1 year, which are big numbers, but we also have to think about the individuals behind these numbers. And a very concrete example of this is a lady called Anastasia Kulundu. She's a maize farmer in Kenya, and she's growing maize on a half acre of land. And before getting this support, she was producing 5 bags of maize on her plot. And with the advice and the right input, she's now producing 15 bags. So it's a tripling of the yields, and that means that instead of making $115, she's making $345, and and it makes a big impression on me when she says that I've been able to pay my children's school fee because of that. So that's at an individual level, but when you aggregate that to the millions, it says something about the power of technology when it's made available, and that's the promise of technology now. And the use of, maybe not all farmers have iPhones, but a lot of them, and most of them, have smartphones, and we can use that to convey the technology and the techniques. And there are much more we can use it for as well. We have this app called @Farm that gives hyper-local weather forecast. It doesn't help a farmer to know what the weather is in the nearest city. The farmer needs to know what's the weather going to be like at my farm, and we made that available. And then what André touched on nature-based solutions, and there are many ways to use nature to help to solve the climate challenge. And one of them would be to make farming more efficient on existing farmland, or even better, by becoming more efficient, freeing up land and turning it back to nature, and using nature as a carbon sink. It is doable to produce more food on less land just through the utilization of existing techniques and technologies. And in addition to that, it is also possible through regenerative farming techniques to capture more carbon in the soil of the farmer, which is a very promising and also helps to say, not only reduce emissions but absorb emissions. But then we need to put incentives in place. Today, farmers are only paid for the crop, not how sustainable it is, not whether they are able to capture more carbon in the soil. So we need to enable that, and we launched actually in Davos last year together with IBM the Open Data Exchange to help to create that transparency and traceability. But obviously, none of this will happen by itself. It requires huge and coordinated efforts.
Yes, thank you for that. That seems obvious. In particular, collaboration across all actors involved around, the food and nature, food and agricultural system. As you mentioned, and in one of the connection with what André was just talking about, we also need to change our practice, as you mentioned, through technology to accelerate and increase productivity, but also through the way we interact with nature to produce food. Are you hopeful that we are now starting such a transition, or we have the means and the willingness to push for such a transition globally, as different form of agricultural practice could really also help us in addressing biodiversity and climate change issues that we are now confronting? Are you hopeful?
Yes, I am hopeful because we have the means for sure. We don't need any technological breakthroughs or any miracles to get this done. But the big question is willingness. Are we willing to do what it takes to get this done? And André pointed it out, trust. There needs to be trust to get this to work, because we have to work through whole value chains. It's about systems leadership. And indeed, now in the World Economic Forum convenes under the virtual week, the theme is 2021, a crucial year to rebuild trust. And Klaus Schwab, again, he really put his finger directly on the issue, trust. And it's about implementing the technologies that we already have in place. And that's probably the trickier part, because the behavioral shift is more complicated than the technological shift. And it goes for all of us, and myself included. We're trained, to optimize. And in business school, we go there to optimize the business we're running. At least in my generation, and that has achieved a lot. But if we are going to be able to deliver on what's needed now, it needs a different kind of collaboration. It needs system leadership, and that's what we need to focus on now. So we have to scrap the old way of thinking. It means giving away control to achieve something that is much larger. And then we have to overcome the fear of sharing knowledge. We need to create open data exchange, and we need to be able to create transparency to decarbonize the whole food system. And at Yara, we have committed to the Davos Manifesto of 2020 that a company is more than the economic unit generating wealth. That performance must be measured, but also on how it achieves its environmental, social, and good governance objectives. So both a carbon marketplace and an open data exchange could and will support this, I believe. So we have 9 years left to achieve the targets. I am hopeful, but we really need to look at SDG number 17 partnership for the goals. We're not going to be able to do this without partnerships.
And I hear in what you're saying also, what I hear clearly is that for individual company contributing to a particular set of goals, there is also a need to basically contribute beyond the own company itself, right? Have that greater sense of purpose. And also have open form of collaboration. This is something that you are pushing for with Yara International. You mentioned, for instance, collaboration around data sharing, etc. So this is something that is new also for business, right? Because it's a contribution to public goods, basically. So what are the main barriers that you see in getting there?
I think both trust and fear, and we launched the Open Data Exchange a year ago, and we're gaining momentum from that. But there will always be the sort of the suspicion that when a private enterprise is engaged in creating an open data exchange, that we're using that to create unfair competitive advantages for ourselves. That isn't the intention. It never was the intention to do that. It is to create transparency, and we should have a solid enough business model that as long as there's traceability and transparency, we should prosper. But I'm willing to take that a step further, that we're actually taking the competence and the knowledge that we have, and I'm ready to move that out of Yara, set it up as a separate legal entity or a trust or whatever, to take away any fear that we're doing this to gain any competitive advantages, because there's urgency. And I see that if we're continuing this only, say, through our own company and within our own company, it will move too slowly. We don't have that time. It's 9 years left. So okay, so then we move it out and then build on that. But we need standards, because look now what is happening on commitments to zero emissions throughout the whole food industry. Okay, what does that mean for me as a farmer when I have 100 companies asking me to measure in this way and that way and so on? And today there's not even a standard to identify a farm field. So what is this going to mean? We need standards.
What do you mean there is not a standard to identify a farm field? What does that mean concretely?
Yes, so if you had a field ID that data could be allocated to, then we can measure. And when we don't even have that in place, how are we going to be able to measure on an aggregate level? And what happens when you have 100 companies asking the same farmer to get data in a little bit different way, all of it? So it's about creating that standard traceability, so that we have a database that we can use to measure, and through that create opportunities and business opportunities for the farmers rather than additional burdens.
Thank you very much. So I'm hearing also here when you speak some other notions that André brought up earlier in terms of the collaboration between public and private. Because when you mentioned, for instance, creating some form of global commons, outside of companies to gather knowledge, data, or whatever is a contribution to all. This is also where you need international organizations, and when you want and need to have these standards so that you could all act through concerted efforts. This is also when you need international organizations and government, because they're all intergovernmental process, of course. So I'm hoping that in this tent over the coming months, these are more conversations we will have, because indeed, and that's also something that was mentioned by Klaus Schwab yesterday, that will be explored on the online Davos, and also a reflection happening at the UN, the need to rethink our multilateral system. 2021 should be indeed the year where we try to re-engineer it differently so that we can accelerate change. So thank you very much for this, Svein Tore, and we'll move to our other speakers and then go back to you for the Q&A. But thank you for also getting pushing us outside of the comfort zone of individual organization. So Our next speaker is on video, so you cannot really see me introduce him properly with his image popping up. I'm talking about Damon Jones, who leads global communication at Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble is a new partner in the SDG Tent this year, so we're delighted to welcome them. It's a company responsible for nearly 100 brands. So in terms of the ripple effect that change within that company can create, it is important. Damon is also in team initiative that he's leading. He is leveraging Procter & Gamble industry presence, advertising spending, and convening power to promote initiatives that drive equality for women, people of color, and other underrepresented groups. A very important part of the agenda that we are discussing today. You will remember from the title of our conversation that we want a more sustainable world, but we also want and need a more equitable and fair world. So as he couldn't be here, I still asked him the question to speak about his company's commitment towards the SDGs and also to give me a concrete illustration about what they are undertaking and what that means in practice. So let's hear it from him. Damon Jones.
Thank you, Katell, for your advocacy alongside all the organizations who are stepping up and stepping forward to make a real difference. We are all here today because we believe in the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals as a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for us all, and in our responsibility as industry leaders to drive bold action that truly meets the changing needs of people and of our planet. As we have heard, COVID-19 has without question altered the course of the SDGs. Economic growth has slowed, unemployment has risen, the equality gap has widened, and we continue to see alarming statistics which show the devastating and lasting impacts of the pandemic. I even read recently that an additional 11 million girls may leave school by the end of the crisis, and 100 million more people will be pushed into extreme poverty. We know that achieving the goals rests on an integrated and collaborative response, and in no small part, it rests on the actions of businesses committed to what we call corporate citizenship, a vision of impact that goes beyond profits and can't be delivered in words alone. It's imperative that the business community evaluate and recalibrate our efforts to propel progress for the SDGs, to ensure that our actions are truly fit for purpose. For us at P&G, this means stepping up as a force for good and as a force for growth, and being deliberate in our approach to equality, to climate action, and to responsible consumption and production. Specifically, this means accelerating action for equality with SDG 5 and 10, continuing and building upon campaigns that tackle bias, such as Always Like a Girl, The Choice or Hair Has No Gender, as well as looking within our own walls and our own industries to foster a workplace where each and every one of us feels empowered to contribute. It also means accelerating our commitments to SDGs 12 and 13, driving innovation to make responsible consumption the floor and not the ceiling for consumers, and accelerating the commitment we made in 2020 to be carbon neutral for the decade across our operations. And it means continuing to forge innovative, values-driven partnerships for SDG 17, helping us to leverage our scale and drive impact for consumers and communities. We have both the responsibility and a unique opportunity to mobilize the P&G's 5 billion consumers to accelerate progress for the SDGs through brands they know, love, and trust, and with our partners. This year, to realize this opportunity, we've launched an external call to action for stakeholders, partners, and consumers to lead with love. Now, recognizing that there are all things we can do, big and small, individually and collectively, this call to action unites our long-standing and ongoing efforts in community impact, equality and inclusion, and environmental sustainability, so we can all come together to do more and do better for communities, equality, and the planet. To lead with love, we are committed to 2021 Acts of Good to bring our global community together and accelerate the progress we all want and need to see. I hope you'll consider joining us in using our voices to spark conversation, open hearts, and inspire people everywhere to take action and to lead with love to help ensure that no SDG is left behind. We at P&G want to be part of the solution, driving bold business action to ensure the Great Reset leads to a stronger, fairer, greener, and more equal world. I, for one, look forward to continuing these discussions with you all over in the SDG tent over the coming year and during the Davos Dialogues next week. I'd love to finish by sharing with you a short film we've created to demonstrate the power of leading with love. It tells the story better than I ever could. Let's take a look.
How can we not connect to that? And indeed, more love is a basic commodity that we will all need to make 2021 a better year. Another change in plan on our next speaker, but we're not losing in quality here. I'd like to welcome FOCO Winges, who will be talking to us on behalf of DSM. He's a VP of partnerships there, which is right on topic because, as you may have heard, FOCO, since we started that conversation, partnership is what has been front and center of our collaboration. Congratulations for your promotion in DSM now. And as I'm officially now the only women in this panel, I will take also more time to share what I think. Jokes on the side, Royal DSM has been also a company promoting and executing strong commitments towards the SDGs. Can you tell us what role DSM sees for companies now, in particular to accelerate progress? Because we all heard 9 years to go, we need to do a little bit better. So can you tell us what are the key actions that you're pushing for at DSM and how you're working with others also to get there? Thanks, FOCO.
Yeah. First of all, we showing our dependencies. There's a big power failure in the southern part of the Netherlands where the designated speaker, Geraldine Matchett, was. So she's just out of power. So it is as it is. So that's why I have to jump in here. SDGs, it's the compass for the world. So I think that we all agree on that, and the other speakers have also been talking about it. So it's obvious that also for business, it is a compass of business. Businesses have a role as an employer, as a taxpayer, but businesses have the most important role is the provider of needed goods and services. They are creating value. And as all the speakers have said so far, and specifically André, when he opened as the first speaker, value is not only that short-term financial value, but value goes way beyond that. And that's why in DSM we now, in 2018, we launched the statement purpose-led, performance-driven. And that, I think, tells it all. We see that if we look at the business for DSM going forward, there are three main drivers. That is nutrition and health, that's climate and energy, and that is resources and circularity. Those sound to many people in government and in civil society perhaps as drivers for them. But they're also drivers for business. They're drivers for us. And that's how we look at it, and that's how we develop our business, that's how we grow our business successfully. And that's how we create value for shareholders. Our stock has been doing extremely well in the last decade, but it's also how we create value for employees. That's how we create value for others. Employees and people in general. I think the COVID crisis has again showed us that people are at the center, and that means not people as a selfish being focusing on their short-term needs, but people as a species that need to live in balance with their environment. And I think that's been a theme that you hear throughout here. So let's focus on that fair, inclusive, sustainable environment. That is our long-term future. Businesses cannot be successful in a society that fails. We have a responsibility, but we also have a benefit from the fact that we develop an inclusive, fair, and sustainable society.
So thanks for jumping in first, and I think you remind us of an important part of this conversation also, which is the fact that there doesn't have to be trade-offs between keeping a focus on purpose, being purposely led organization, as you mentioned, and also having making progress in terms of your value in the stock exchange and your profit, right? So we're really talking here about how do we engineer growth differently. We're talking about a different form of growth. And as your role again as a VP partnerships there, could you tell me what's the partnership within DSM that you're the most proud of? That has contributed to a real impact on this mission that DSM has put to itself to really promote health, nutrition, and sustainable living. What's the best partnership that you can, that you always talk about when you come to this kind of conversation?
Yeah, then I'll look, of course, the partnerships where I'm responsible for. 2007, we looked at the World Food Programme's mission and said, that's great. They have an important mission. Hence the question we had asked David to open the tent today. The World Food Programme has an important mission: feeding hungry people and feeding those that are in real bad need. But what we also saw at that point in time was they were focusing on filling an empty stomach. And we, as the largest micronutrient supplier, largest vitamin and mineral supplier in the world, said it's a missed opportunity. You fill an empty stomach, so you manage to reach people, but you keep them alive, and they will not thrive, because if they don't get the essential micronutrients, kids will not develop to their maximum potential. People will fall sick easily. So we teamed up with the World Food Programme, and for me, partnerships is a matter of complementary competencies. We do that when we have business partnerships, but we also do it when we have public-private partnerships. Look for the complementarity, look for the shared mission and the shared vision, and then get on board. With the World Food Programme, we said, how can we reach as many beneficiaries possible with improved nutrition? And World Food Programme feeds, unfortunately, today, again, more people, 270 million. At that point in time, they were feeding about 100 million. And the target was, let's now change the approach of the World Food Programme. And thereby we've managed to make World Food Programme a powerhouse of nutrition, and not only a 25 kilogram bag carrier. And that reaches now today about 40 million people get improved nutrition thanks to our partnership. We've helped the World Food Programme change. And to complete the picture for everybody on this call, it's good for the world, but it's of course also good for DSM. If we manage to grow the attention for nutrition, then of course as a nutrition supplier, it's also beneficial for us. We don't make a secret out of that. That is also part of what we do. We provide essential, necessary products, and we help reach as many people as possible to have access to them. We believe it's important.
Thank you very much. As a former UNICEF employee, I can also testify to this progress. And we know that's what David Beasley is not with us today, to attend to these needs, unfortunately. And we also know that we need more progress here, because what's happened in terms of human capital development is that COVID-19 has actually pushed us back to the progress we had achieved over the past decade. So not only do we have to accelerate progress, but we have to pay back for the setback that we've had, including last year in certain parts of the world. So thanks for reminding us of that. I'm now turning to some of the questions that we are receiving already. And I would like to start with you, André, if you're still here with us. The question is coming from Michel Fiorini, Dr. Michel Fiorini. Do you think that that what is needed is a radical change in the balance sheet to address nature and other resources currently ignored? And I am not hearing you, so I'm guessing our audience.
Sorry, I was on mute. I mean, the most famous sentence of 2021, I'm on mute, I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. And yes, I do think it's absolutely indispensable. One of the reasons why industrial activity has been so negative onto the whole climate system and to the whole world system is because we have been looking only at balance sheet and profit and losses and not really at the impact these companies are having. So we need to introduce an accounting system for impact. And there are lots of initiatives developing in this in particular, but really fundamentally, and I'm talking in a session moderated by somebody from a business school, I must say what we really do have is an accounting problem. We just measure the wrong thing. The impact is more important than the net result at the end. And if we can introduce a way which will allow us to look at the four capitals, i.e. the environmental capital, the social capital, the human capital, and the constructed capital, the financial capital, then we will have a way to maximize these four capitals for the benefit of all. And it's only as simple as that. You need to measure what you manage, or you rather need to manage what you measure, but you will not manage something that you cannot measure. And as long as we don't manage it, we're not going to go very far.
Thank you, André. And indeed, I mean, I cannot make a lot of promotion for the work we do at INSEAD, but just to concur on the fact that research is indeed advanced at INSEAD and elsewhere. For instance, in Harvard, you have the, a new initiative pushing for that on how you account differently. And also to mention that this year, there are a number of progress that are done on the auditors front, on the standards front, to try and make progress so that this whole ESG systems are starting to get standardized. We're going back to some of the important points that Svein you were mentioning earlier about the need to have standards so that we can all operate under the same roof. So let me move to a very specific question to you.
Katell, can I just add that this is going to be a theme of the Davos Dialogue starting next Monday. This is something quite important. We want to bring more people together around this table to talk about this. We need to measure impact in a way that is accountable to all. So sorry I was just doing promotion as well.
You all agree that 2020...
If I may build on it. Yes. It's important, and I fully agree with both of you too, that we do need to change the standard because it makes it easier and it makes it much broader, and we can grow, we can accelerate. I would also say for the short term, let us not hide behind the fact that we do not have a system. I think we as a company, we ourselves have initiated, our projects now need to go through a carbon intensity, and so we just apply 50 euros per ton CO2 to evaluate our projects. So let's not wait for it. Let's act also already today.
Indeed, thank you very much. And as a matter of fact, we have 2 minutes left. So I think what I'm seeing through the questions that we have, what people are eager for as well is to leave them with the one piece of advice. Like if people in our audience right now are working in an organization, I'm assuming that mostly in businesses, what is the one piece of advice each one of you want to leave them with at the end of this conversation so that they also contribute to accelerating progress? Svein, I'm going to start with you because I had a question for you, but now I don't have time. So what is the one piece of advice that I need to live with and everybody needs to leave this conversation with?
Well, it's the urgency. And you said, well, COVID has been a significant setback. But But let's also see what has been possible to do when we're faced with a real and tangible emergency that affects everyone. It's everyone has been somehow affected. The thing with the climate is that it's not hitting everyone hard at the same time. Some people are hit extremely hard already. Some have not been hit hard. But with the climate, we're passing tipping points where we're at the point where it's felt by everyone. It's already too late. So we need to act now and with great urgency.
Act now. Thank you very much, Svein, for joining us today. FOCO, you've had time to think. I need one short action.
Use the SDGs as your compass, because that means you can do well as you can do well by doing good.
SDG remains a compass, including after the crisis. Thank you, FOCO, for joining us last minute. I appreciate that. André, your one action, your one.
Well, thank you for giving me the last word. I think I'd like to bring back a couple of threads of what we discussed today. The SDG, the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord are on the table. We are not asking for huge amounts of new efforts. We are saying just deliver on what's already been signed. If we are living up to the SDGs in 9 years' time, if we are delivering the Paris target, we are going towards some solution. So business has to step up to deliver on these two contracts which are already on the table. It's not a question of being too innovative. And FOCO is right. We shouldn't hide about the fact that we don't have yet an impact measurement, but we should make sure that we work with the tools we have towards the common good. It's important that we access all this with humility. This is not the bad against the good. It's the fact that we are not asking the right questions which has led us where we are. The right question will give us the right answer. And the right question is, how do we maximize output by minimizing impact? And we need to work on this.
Thank you very much. I think if Damon had been here, we'd have also tell us, love, that's important. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, for all our panelists, including the last minute ones. Thank you. Thank you for members of our audience. This was a kickoff event. In the coming weeks and months, we will continue that conversation, taking deep dives in some of these issues. If you want to stay aware of these upcoming events, you can log on to businessforsdgs.com, businessforsdgs.com. On the website, you can log in you can subscribe to the newsletter, but you can also see events as they come. We look forward to seeing you very soon. Stay healthy and take care. Goodbye.